Hello and welcome everyone to this Chess Heroes series in which I'll review games from different chess heroes from the past and present, some well known and others less well known, or some you may never even have heard of. So today I'm going to review two games by CJS Purdy, Cecil Purdy, who was a four-time Australian chess champion. He was born in 1906 and died in 1979. And he had many interesting games, a long career. He was also very well known for writing many chess articles in different magazines. And I believe he wrote some books as well. And Bobby Fischer was a big fan of Purdy's after reading some of his articles and different chess instructional material. So let's go over this first game in which Purdy has the white pieces and he's playing against, I believe, Solomon M. Merkel with the black pieces. And Purdy plays 94.9% accuracy here versus his opponent of 81.6. And he plays one great move, but very interesting here. He has no inaccuracies, no mistakes, misses, blunders. His opponent has two inaccuracies and two mistakes. So let's take a look at this game. One other thing, let's see when this game occurred in 1930. And looks like it was played in Sydney, Australia. All right, let's take a look here. So Purdy starts off with d4 and his opponent responds with d5. And now we have knight to f3. So this move fortifies the d pawn, keeps an eye on this e5 square, and it kind of waits to see what his opponent will do here. So his opponent just mimics Purdy's moves, also developing a knight here, and Purdy plays e3. So some of you may not be as familiar with this opening. This is the Kali system, and you may see the London system where they develop this bishop outside of the pawn chain before pushing this e pawn. But here, a lot of times you just develop the knight. You'll develop your other knight to here, to d2, put your bishop on d3. But it also depends on what your opponent does as well. So in the game, we have this move, bishop to f5. So now that kind of slows down Purdy's plan of pushing this bishop to d3 because then the bishop could just capture. So his opponent would get rid of this bad bishop, which is placed on the same color as his pawns. So once he moves this pawn to e6 here, this bishop would be kind of limited on where it can move to. So he would love to trade off this bad bishop for Purdy's good bishop, which is on the opposite color squares of his central pawns here. So it would be able to move through these pawns much easier than his opponents. So in order to avoid this trade, Purdy doesn't play the Kali system, quite the normal way of developing this bishop to d3. He plays this c4. So this is a great move because it counterattacks this central pawn with a flank pawn. Also, it can let the knight develop up here to c3 and not block this c pawn. So let's see how the game continues. e6, and now we have the queen developing here, just fortifying the c pawn, attacking this b7 pawn, maybe even putting some pressure on this d pawn. But because this bishop has developed outside the pawn chain, Purdy takes note of that and immediately attacks this b pawn with this queen. So b6 is played to block that attack, but this leaves weaknesses here, especially with the bishop over here and not able to fianchetto into b7 here and guard these light squares. So Purdy just continues development, jumping his knight up here. And it looks like the computer preferred bishop to d2. But why not bring the knight up here, help put pressure on the d pawn, keep an eye on this square here, this e5 square, in case the knight tries to jump in there. Because if the bishop developed here, the knight could possibly jump to e4 and attack that bishop immediately. All right, so now we have d takes c4, and the computer says that's an inaccuracy, that bishop to e7 would have been better. So the computer prefers this move, bishop to e7, which develops the bishop, gets the king ready to castle to safety, and helps develop the rook. So in the game, and if this move was played, the game would be more even. White would have still a slight advantage, but in the game we had d takes c4, attacking the queen. So now the game continues with bishop capturing here, which is the best move. So another, I guess, byproduct of this pawn capturing and attacking the queen, well, that helped better develop this bishop, because the bishop was a little bit limited, but now the pawn was captured. So Purdy gets rid of one of these important central pawns with a flank pawn, and he was able to develop his bishop out here, which kind of lines up through the center and towards this f pawn. So now we have a mistake by Purdy's opponent. So this knight move, the computer does not like that. Once again, it wants bishop to e7 to help get ready to castle here. So let's take a look and see why this move looks like a mistake here. How does Purdy take advantage of it? All right, so bishop to b5, pinning the knight to the king, and the game continues with bishop to d6, another mistake. So the computer does not like that. It wants this immediate c5 move here, because now if c5 was played, well, white would still be ahead, but at least a flank pawn would attack one of these strong central pawns here. All right, so Purdy takes advantage of this by jumping his bishop up here to c6, which the computer says is a great move, and we'll find out why this is such a great move here, because the follow-up is pretty great here, what Purdy does. So let's take a look and see how he gains an advantage, even more than the advantage he already has. So the rook is under attack and moves to b8. Now the computer says that is an inaccuracy, and it is +4 to white after that move. So pretty much a winning advantage. And if we look at the material, we have 7 pawns versus 7. We have 4 minor pieces, so material is even. But what is different in this position? Well, it looks like black is a little more cramped. His knight is pinned and immobilized here. The rook is in not the greatest position, but if we look at Purdy's pieces, he's ready to castle, as is black, and all he has to do is develop his bishop. So the pieces, they're about even, except for this knight being pinned here. But if we notice that this knight and this bishop could be vulnerable if a pawn was able to make its way up here. So this is what Purdy noticed. He'll be able to launch this pawn forward, protected by the bishop here, chasing this bishop away, and then moving forward and forking these pieces. So let's take a look at this. And also, let's see what would have been better. It looks like instead of that rook move, bishop to g4 would have been better, because then the bishop wouldn't be chased away with tempo by this e4 pawn push, allowing the pawn to move up to e5 and fork these pieces. So this would have at least helped with black's problems. White would still have the advantage, but this is what happened in the game. So the rook is under attack and moves. And now we have e4, chasing the bishop away. The bishop retreats and the pawn pushes forward, forking these two pieces here. So this is ignored. The opponent just castles, and the knight is captured, which is best. So, I was kind of wondering what would be the difference here. Well, I guess if you captured the bishop, it would pull this backwards pawn into the center. So then black would have two strong central pawns versus white's one central pawn. So why capture this bishop? You'd get rid of the bishop pair, but it would kind of fortify black's center. So it looks like that is why it's better to capture the knight here. And then the opponent responds by capturing with the knight. And now we have this bishop to g5 move, pinning the queen. The computer says that's excellent, and white pretty much has a winning advantage now. But it looks like castling was preferred by the computer. So moving on, we have bishop to e7, breaking the pin. Now we have castling by white, and the queen moves forward, connecting the rooks, giving them more mobility. And let's see what Purdy does next. So queen to c4. The queen was attacking this bishop. So instead of retreating that bishop, Purdy moves his queen closer towards the center, guards the bishop, and now we have this threat here. So it looks like the computer preferred a direct push, attacking the queen, and then that pawn, it appears, could be captured by the bishop. But instead, he pushes this a pawn, and Purdy sees what's happening here, the threat against the queen. So a4 is played, which is the best move in the position to slow down the advance of these pawns. And now rook to d8, just creating a battery on the half-open file, putting pressure on this pawn. And now we have rook to c1, doing likewise, putting a rook on the half-open file with the queen. So once the knight and the bishop move, there could be pressure created up here on this backward c pawn. And now this bishop, which had a good diagonal down through the center, it moves to h5, I guess threatening to capture and trade off material. The computer says that's still an excellent move, but it prefers bishop to f5 here. So rook to d1, just helping fortify this pawn in the center. And now, let's see, we have h6 attacking the bishop here. So the bishop retreats, luring the kingside pawns forward and possibly creating some weaknesses up here. So the bishop retreats, and now the queen is under attack. So I don't know. Black, it looks like black just pushed this bishop to a better square. Maybe black was unsure what to do in the position. But now the queen is under attack, has to move, and attacks. Apparently, this is the best move, attacking white's queen. So white, of course, is going to capture. Bishop captures. But now this bishop is able to capture a pawn and fork both rooks here. So one rook moves to attack. The bishop captures. And now we have a recapture. And so now the knight jumps up, just attempting to trade off material. So if we look at the position now, Purdy is ahead by +5 in material. So whenever you're ahead in material, and now it depends, if you're ahead in material, you want to trade off pieces. And the reason is, if you trade off the pieces equally with your opponent, and in the end you just have an extra piece, well, you can use that extra piece to help promote your pawns. And on the other side of that, if you're behind in material, you want to trade off as many pawns as you can, because if your opponent is ahead a knight or a bishop and everything's traded off and there are no pawns left, well, it's a draw. You can't win with an extra knight or an extra bishop. So that is the idea behind all that. So a retreat here, knight to h7, avoiding the trade of material, but now this knight is on the rim of the board and not looking good over there. So now we have the pawn pushing forward, and so the computer says that this move is excellent, but better would have been to just knock off this pawn. As I mentioned earlier, if you're behind in material, you want to trade off pawns. So it would have been better to do that. I assume the opponent didn't want the bishop to recapture and line up on the king, maybe. Who knows? Or he didn't want a rook to move forward and attempt to double the rooks. But it's looking bad for black here. So the final moves, we have the pawn pushing forward, getting close to promotion. A counterattack by black on the king side here, but it's too late. This pawn just keeps pushing. This attack on the knight is ignored because this pawn is trying to make a run for it here. So the rook blocks to prevent the promotion, and the knight has time to move out of the line of fire here. And now this knight will be able to jump here and cover this queening square and chase that rook away. So in this position, a few more moves pass before black finally resigns. So we have a capture of material here. So trading off more material. And when you're behind in material, you want to avoid piece trades and trade off as many pawns as you can. So by trading off more material here, it just kind of helped white more, but that knight was threatening to jump up here and chase the rook away. So, it was kind of forced. So now we have e4 pushing forward with the pawns. That is ignored, and we have a check. And this is where black resigned. And so the game may have continued with the king being under check, so he moves towards the pawn here. But now the knight jumps up in the action, getting ready to chase this rook away and protect the pawn. So finally, black pushes forward, attempting to trade off some material, but he just gives up this pawn for free. And now we already have a mate in 8 approaching here. So g4, capture, and now at this point, the game is just looking really bad for black, so that's why he resigned. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed that game, which was played in, let me check here, 1930. So now I'll go over one more game, and this one, in this game, Purdy, who was, I believe, about a 2,400 rated player, is playing another 2,400 player. So this will be a more even matchup than that previous game. And if I hadn't mentioned it already, well, let's see. This game is played in Australia in 1951. So 2 years later, in 1953, Purdy would become the first official world correspondence chess champion. So another interesting fact about Purdy there. So I encourage you, if you haven't heard of him, to look him up online, try and read some of his material, any articles or books that you can find. He was a great chess teacher and a pretty solid chess master as well. So let's take a look at this game from 1951. Purdy once again with the white pieces, and he's playing from Hungary, I believe, Lajos Steiner. So the game begins, I should say, with d4 once again by Purdy, playing a more strategic game, and knight to f6, this waiting move, trying to see what white will do next. And we have c4. So this knight move controls the e4 square, so e4 cannot be played or the pawn would just be captured. So now we have the next best thing, moving the c4 or the c pawn up to c4. So you have these two central pawns instead of the d and e pawns. But also, by pushing this c pawn first, it lets the knight jump in behind, and then you can really fortify and help try to control this d5 square, which black will most likely push a pawn to there. So we have e6 here, and now white continues with knight to c3 and d5. So the game has transposed into a queen's gambit declined here. So now we have bishop to g5, pinning this knight to the queen, and the game continues with bishop to e7, breaking the pin, knight to f3, just developing a piece here and also helping control the center, and h6, forcing this bishop to make a decision, either retreat or capture here. So in the game, we have a capture. And now this pulls the bishop to this diagonal, and we'll see if that turns out to be a good spot for that bishop or not. All right, so here we have e4. And the computer doesn't like that so much, trying to just grab control of the center with all three of these pawns, because now this pawn can be captured and it breaks up the center a little bit, opens things up. So let's go back and see what is recommended here. It looks like either e3, just fortifying this central pawn, queen to c2, developing, or rook to c1. So we have e4, and now d takes e4. The knight captures, attacking the bishop, so the bishop retreats. So perhaps Purdy played this variation to gain a little bit of time by attacking the bishop and having that bishop retreat. Now it's Purdy's turn, and he has two pieces developed, two pawns in the center. And if we look at black's position, he just has the one bishop developed and it's pretty, well, it's a little more passive here. It does control these two nice diagonals, but it's not really hitting much of the central squares. And this pawn is only on e6 here, so it's really restricting the movement of this other bishop, blocking it in. And now Purdy plays bishop to d3, so developing the bishop to a nice square here, controlling e4, but more importantly aiming up here towards the king side. And now we have knight to d7, and the computer does not like that move. It looks like, let's see here, looks like f5, chasing the knight away. But I don't know if I would like that so much, because it would leave this backwards e-pawn also good as castling. So that's probably better to just go ahead and castle here. And also it likes knight to c6. Alright, so before I go further, I should have done a quick game review to see what the accuracy rating is in this game. So once again, Purdy plays at a high level, 88.9% accuracy versus 83.7% by his opponent. And if we look at this, it looks like Purdy and his opponent have a solid game that's pretty equal until we get to the middle here, and it kind of swings in Black's favor before jumping up, and Purdy gains a huge advantage before going on to win. So let's see what else happened in this. Purdy has 4 inaccuracies versus opponent's 3. 3 mistakes. His opponent has 3 mistakes. They both have 2 misses and then 1 blunder by his opponent. All right, so back to the analysis. So we'll run through this real quick. d4, knight to f6, c4. So a pin on the knight. The pin is broken. The knight develops. The bishop is attacked. And we have a capture, recapture. But now we have e4, which the computer didn't like, threatening to either push forward and gain space and chase that bishop away, or capture here, which is best for Black. And now the knight recaptures, chasing the bishop, and as the bishop retreats, which the computer did not like that. It wanted instead, let's see, knight to c6, it looks like. But we had the retreat here, because if the bishop, I should go back here. If the bishop stayed there, well, now Black could just develop another piece, and then they would both have 2 pieces developed. And if the knight captured to get rid of the bishop pair, well, then that would pull the queen forward and develop the queen. Now, whether that queen really belongs on f6, who knows? At least it would land the queen over here to the king side and maybe put pressure on the king side. So in the game, we have a retreat. And now bishop to d3. So Black probably also retreated to keep his bishop pair. And now knight to d7, which the computer did not like. It instead preferred this bishop to b4 move, checking the king. So after this move, we have the bishop blocked in. The queen is kind of blocked in by that. But we'll see what Black is trying to do here. So the game continues with castling by Purdy, and now b6 to get this bishop out and developed. So queen up here to e2. Now the rooks are connected and have more freedom to maneuver and develop where they need to go, which is usually the half open file or behind these pawns that they want to push forward. All right, so bishop to b7, lining up on the center and aiming at the king side. And now rook to d1. So lining up on this half open file, getting ready to help protect this pawn or help push this pawn forward, and also lining up on the queen. So if these pieces move out of the way, the queen could be a target here. So castling. And now Purdy launches his knight forward here, trying to perhaps open this file up for the rook aimed at the queen. So now we have the queen getting off of that line, and it looks like it actually preferred a capture here of the knight. And Bobby Fischer had an interesting rule of thumb that whenever your opponent puts a piece on your side of the board, like this knight up here on e5, you should do whatever you can to get that piece out of there, because as the pieces move into your position, they can become much stronger, especially when they start trying to line up an attack somewhere, especially these knights. They're a little bit more able to attack when they move into your position. And we have two knights, a bishop, the queen. Everything is slowly funneling over here to the king side. So now the rook lines up on the half open file. The bishop retreats back here to allow the rook to help protect this pawn and maybe get ready to fight for this d file. So f5 is played, and the computer says that is best. So we see a backwards e pawn on this half open e file, which could become a target, and it's not even protected at the moment. But this does gain some time by attacking this knight and forcing white to make a decision on what to do about this knight. Where is this knight going to go? So knight to c3, which is best. He just retreats back here, and he could possibly push this d pawn and have the knight help protect this d5 square if this pawn decides to try and advance in the future. So we have an attack here and a capture with the pawn. So this is interesting. If we look at this, sometimes a queen capture may be played here, or a rook or knight or whatever piece to leave an opening to put pressure on this backwards pawn. But it looks like the computer says that capturing with the queen or even this d pawn is not the best move. So capturing with the flank pawn, this f pawn, towards the center, the computer says that is best, because now white has two strong central pawns and black only has one here on e6. So let's see how Purdy uses these strong central pawns to maintain an advantage and, well, try to gain an advantage, because right now it looks like the game is even. So the king just slides off of this line, perhaps giving the rooks room to line up on the g file on the king and push these pawns forward. So now we have a3, and the computer says that's the best move, which I guess it prevents the bishop from moving down here and attacking the knight. It may help with a push of this b pawn to gain more space on the queen side. And now the queen moves here to f7, but the computer likes queen to g6 better to just immediately line up on the king. But I don't know, I guess that would block in this pawn. Black probably wants to push this g pawn and then funnel in behind these pawns. All right, so we have d5 attacking this weak backward pawn, threatening to just open the d file, maybe exchange off material here. This does kind of block the bishop, so we have this being ignored in the center in favor of this g pawn. being pushed, which I guess that gives black more room here, maybe to line up pieces. And it also fortifies this F pawn, which if this is captured, that F pawn could become weak, being attacked by the bishop and the rook. So G6 fortifies the F pawn. And now we have the bishop lining up on this diagonal on the queen here. So the rook moves over, but the computer prefers instead king to G7. All right, so let's see what continues here, how the game continues. Rook at F to E1, so just creating a battery here. And now we have bishop to H4. The computer says that's good, but it prefers bishop to C5 with check instead. So now G3, attacking the bishop, but the computer says that's an inaccuracy, that it would have been better instead to move the rook and line it up on the queen here. So now we have a retreat, and that's best. H3. So now some pawn maneuvering. The queen moves over here, which is interesting. I guess the queen is trying to help fortify this pawn because we have 1, 2, 3, 4 attackers, and we have 1, 2, 3 defenders, 4, now 5 defenders with the queen. But I find it interesting that the queen is moved to a diagonal where this bishop is aiming. So let's see how it plays out here. And the computer says that king to G2 would have been better, which is also funny, putting the king on the line of this diagonal. All right, so now we have queen to G7, and the computer says that's a mistake, and the game swings to plus 0.7 in black's favor, or excuse me, white's favor. So why was that move not so good? Well, it looks like it preferred H4 to try and get some activity here, open things up on white's king side. And let's see what happens next. So the king moves over here to get off of the line of the queen, but it looks like the best move would have been bishop to A4 to just move up here and attack this rook. So now H4, attacking the pawn, trying to open things up here. G4 is played. And the computer says that's a mistake, and now black is ahead here by 0.81. So apparently that pawn push should have been ignored, and the knight should have jumped up here and forked these pawns on A7 and C7 here. All right, so the rook moves over, lining up on the queen, and it looks like the pawn should have immediately just captured here. So now we have the rook moving up to E2, and the computer says that's a mistake, and now black is just ahead by over a pawn's worth of material. And the computer likes king to H1, which is, I don't know, pretty odd, because then you would have the bishop lined up on the queen and the king. So bishop to G5, just trying to take control of this diagonal here, fortifying this pawn. And well, let's just see what happens now. So we have the bishop moving here, aiming at this pawn in case there's an exchange here. Well, then the bishop may be able to target this G pawn. If this pawn on F5 captures and then the queen captures, they would put pressure on this G pawn here. All right, so the queen moves over, creating a strong battery here. And now we have capture. the computer does not like that. That's a mistake. And now it is 1.5 in black's favor. So black is ahead pretty good here. Once again, it wanted that king to h1 move. So let's see why. The game continues with a recapture towards the center. And now Purdy lines up here, creating a battery of rook and queen. And rook to g8. So we see why this move is played. It looks like we have an open g file. Why not load your rooks up here? Put a rook here, move it forward, bring the other one in. You're firing down on the king side. But the computer says that's a mistake, cutting black's advantage in half. So now, well, before we go on, it looks like a6 would have been better to keep this knight out of here. Keep the knight from jumping to b5 and attacking these pawns. So the queen retreats down to here, getting off of the line of the bishop. But the computer says that's a miss. That knight to b5, forking the pawns, would have been better. All right. So the rooks, well, this rook moves up, getting ready to possibly double rooks up on the g file. Computer says that's a miss, and now the game is even again. Bishop to e7 would have maintained an advantage, because from here the bishop could reposition up to e7 and then maybe jump down here to c5, attacking the queen. The rooks could start shooting down the g file. So the game continues with Purdy capturing here, which is best, and the game is dead even according to the computer. So now the bishop is activated here. The rooks are trying to double up, but Purdy does have two passed pawns, even though they're doubled here. So a blunder is played by his opponent. So this move is a blunder, +2 in white's favor now. So let's see if we can figure out why this move is a blunder here. All right, well, it looks like there's a threat of attacking, with the rook down the file here, attacking the king and the queen, backed up by the bishop. So let's see how this plays out. Well, first, before we go on, let's see what should have been played. Looks like, oh man, that's an interesting move. Bishop to g2. That's quite interesting. Or rook to f8. Just moving over here and helping, maybe control this a little bit more. But bishop to g2, what is that move all about? Well, then we would have, and it says that would be a brilliant move that would keep the game even, because after queen captures, well, then bishop to f4 check, king to h1, and now rook captures, and capture of the pawn. So I don't know, with this crazy continuation, it says the game would be even. But in the game, after the capture here and this blunder, let's see why this move is a blunder. Well, the game continues with the best move. Purdy finds the best move, capturing here. And now we have the rooks lining up here, creating a battery. And the computer says that that's an inaccuracy and that white has a winning advantage now. Better would have been to immediately put the rook down here on g1. So that looks like another crazy move. Actually, it's saying bishop to g5 also. All right, anyway, let's finish this out. So the rooks line up, creating a battery. The bishop moves over here to block black's bishop and also cover this g2 square from the rooks trying to come down at some point. But anyway, we have capture, knight capture. So now this knight is pulled into the center where it's a little more active. And then we have this check. The king moves. Bishop retreats. And the knight jumps up here deep into black's position in the king side. And so now, instead of playing this, so this rook is under attack. So it looks like the best move would be to move this rook over to d8 and just cover the bishop. But even then, white is pretty much winning now. So we have this move, attacking the queen. That's an inaccuracy. Now we have a capture and counter-attacking the queen over here. So capture, queen is captured, rook is captured, and now the king moves, attacking, and a check here by the rook. So the king moves over, and it looks like it would have been better to move towards the center because now the king is just blocked in here. So the knight is under attack, and we have a fork on the knight and this passed pawn up here. So the knight retreat is best. And it's interesting that he didn't move forward and attack the king. The king would just be chased into the center to a better square than in this corner up here. And then this pawn would end up being captured here. All right, so now we have c5, the best move, helping to fortify this bishop and protect. So now the knight captures, which is best, and attacks the rook. Rook captures the first passed pawn, but we still have this one. But now there are, well, two pieces attacking, only one defending. So the knight jumps down here to help protect, but it looks like it would have been better to just move the king up and activate this king. So now the kings start marching forward. Well, it looks like black comes forward and then retreats. So white just continues his movement forward. So now the rook is attacking the unprotected pawn over here. The pawn just moves forward. So at this point, white has a winning advantage. He has two extra pawns, both of them passed pawns, and it's just going to be really hard to stop them. But black plays on a little bit here. How many moves do we have left? So about another 10 moves or so. So the king attacks, rook retreats. Now this pawn is moving forward. The king retreats back to help protect the knight. So we have a check. King moves over, check. Now the king is centralized, and knight and king are piling up on the bishop here. So the rook moves over. Looks like it would have been better to just go after this pawn. But now the pawn is moving forward, and that's going to be a problem. So capture, capture, and let's see. Looks like the game ended here. So let's see how it could have continued. White has these two passed pawns. This one is far advanced, and it's not looking good for black. And this pawn here is about ready to be picked off, and then there'll be another passed pawn over here with this 3 versus 2 pawn majority. All right, so the game could have continued with blocking of the pawn, capture, king moves up to block this pawn, White moves in the center to keep the black king from infiltrating into his position. And black is just running out of moves here, so the game could have continued with the king getting ready to move up and chase the rook away. Check. King moves back. So, that is an interesting move, just giving this pawn away. So after a capture, well, then it would allow this to move forward. So, you'd be forced to capture, and it would just be losing here. Capture. And white would have no problems, from here on out. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed these 2 game reviews of games played by CJS Purdy, who once again lived from 1906 to 1979. He was a 4-time Australian chess champion, and he also was the first official world correspondence chess champion back in 1953. And I think he won the second correspondence world championship as well. But I highly recommend checking out some of his books or articles that he has written in the past. Bobby Fischer was a huge fan. So, if Bobby Fischer liked what CJS Purdy wrote, then there's a good chance that there's a lot of good and valuable chess material in there. All right, everybody. If you haven't liked or subscribed, please do so to support the channel. Feel free to leave comments, requests, suggestions, whatever in the comments. All right. Thank you all for watching and have a super chess day.